Good morning. We'll start up here in about 20, 30 seconds. We'll let folks sign in. Sorry to push that late, but the microphone was giving me grief. That's the way things go. Okay. Got a good crowd this morning. That's good to see. It's amazing what happens when there's money involved. So, good morning and welcome to the second of our three proven countermeasures webinars and the third of five overall dealing with roadway departures and the call for funds. My name is David Orr, and I'm the director here at the LTAP Center here in New York State, NYS LTAP. We're part of the Cornell Local Roads program. So today we're going to be talking about some pavement and geometric issues. Last week we talked about signing, delineation, and lighting. And then next Thursday, we'll be talking about improving chances for safe recovery. And I'll mention another webinar we're doing in a week dealing with the ball bank later on. A lot of the materials are available in a handout that talks about everything from the Federal Highways Administration's proven safety countermeasures, the state's roadway departure safety action plan, our Safer Roads and Streets workbook, which is going out 2 more times this spring. If you're interested, go on our website and look for it. So again, you might want to open up your chat pod so you can download that. And again, I'll repeat that again so it pops up in the chat pod here in a couple of minutes. If you haven't been on our webinars before, like a little friend here who was brand new little squirrel, he was about 6 inches long, cute little critter. You just remember your audio settings are down in the lower left. The chat pod, you should open that up. It's a one-way street. We aren't allowing chats in, but that's how we can send you links to the handouts, and we may send you some other information during the course of the webinar, like the links to the polls. So you want to open that up. Might ask you to raise your hand a few times, and then the Q&A is where you can put in your questions, and we'll answer them. Any questions you've got, even if it's just technical questions about sound or getting access to the handout, you can put them there, and then in the background, Amanda and Jody will make sure everything runs smoothly. Professional development hours, it'll be worth a PDH. It will be delayed a little bit. We've got some paperwork to get through, so don't send an email to us this week. We'll probably send them out in a batch next week just to get everything taken care of. So let's do a quick welcome. We're going to use pollev.com/DavidOrP. And if you've opened up your chat pod, there's a link, so you don't have to type that all in. This just helps me figure out who's on our webinar today. Okay, so who do you work for? Town, county, city or village, state or fed, tribal? You're with an MPO, you're a consultant, you're a contractor, and there's a few of you who are working for the weekend. Okay, that's good to know. Okay. I like that variety. That's pretty good variety. Okay. And again, if you can't answer it, you can pop it into the Q&A. Let's see what your job is. Are you the highway superintendent? Are you an administrator? Are you an engineer by trade? A planner? Are you part of a field crew? A board member, supervisor? Whatever the boss tells me to do. See if everybody caught that. A few of you put that down. And none of the above. If you put none of the above, make sure you throw it in the Q&A so I know what that means. Most of you are engineers, but I just want to make sure I don't forget to talk about things. For instance, I see several of you are supervisors and board members, and certainly there's some things that we can talk about. And okay, we got a planner in there. Okay, that's good to know. And then where are you from across the state? Just, you have to click on the map. I'll have you do this on a couple of other polls. Oh, we have somebody way up in Canada, and we have some people out in Lake Ontario. I didn't know they had Wi-Fi towers out there, but that's okay. Okay, we're downstate, Long Island, upstate, all over the place. Nobody up in this far north country. And we got somebody throwing in the Q&A from White Plains. Okay, that helps me quite a bit. I got a variety of folks, a lot of urban, quite a few of you in rural areas, so that's good to know. Okay. Now, what we're going to be talking about really is part of what we're doing to help the State Department of Transportation with their Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan. And we're going to be talking about the call for funds and all that. And as I had mentioned last week, we're doing these three independent webinars and countermeasures, so we have to repeat a few things so they're all worthy of something. I would advise you to go onto the website they've got for this action plan and download not only the action plan and the call for funds, but make sure you look at the appendices. There's a lot of really good information in there, and you're really going to want to look at that information before you make any decisions on where you're going next. And why are we focused on this? Well, if you look at the number of fatal and serious injuries, and serious injuries sometimes are labeled A or an IA, you'll see different abbreviations used, mostly A within the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan. That means a serious injury, a fatality would be a K. Um, there are too many of them. Okay, I mean, our goal should be zero. Obviously, it may be difficult to get there, but that still should be our goal. But you can see we've been pretty flat. And yeah, there was a small dip in 2024, but that small dip may just be a 1 year thing. We really don't know. We need a trend, and we really need to get that trend going downwards. And almost, 3,000 people is too many people whose lives have been changed, dramatically altered, which is what a serious injury is. Now, the concept for roadway departures, and the reason we're focused on this, is about 40% of the overall serious injuries and fatalities occur due to that. And so the idea is we're going to keep the vehicle on the road, and then we're going to do that. We talked about different countermeasures. We'll be talking about some more today, and that is keep people in their lane. Don't let them cross over. Don't have them go off the shoulder. That's the first thing we want to do. Then we want to reduce the potential for a crash. We don't want them hitting something. If they hit something, that's not good. So maybe we make sure the road's a little bit wider. Make sure we have good clear zones. We're talking about that quite a bit today. And then finally, if they do hit something, we want to minimize the severity of that crash. Things like breakaway hardware is an example of that. We'll talk about some of those today, and we talked about some last week, and we'll talk about some on Thursday. Now, many of you are probably on here because there's money involved. There's a roadway departure local call for projects. If you have any questions upon that project or the call that's coming out, make sure you go and look at the local call webpage. This is in the handout that we're sending out, as well as you can send a direct email to Andrew Sattinger at the New York State Department of Transportation. Now, the state has released $90 million for local roads, and that's the key. It has to be on a local road. That's a county, town, village, or a city facility, not a state highway. Okay, so it's for local roads. It's 90 million, and 10 million of that has been set aside specifically for developing local road safety plans. If you don't have one, absolutely you should put in and try to get a local road safety plan. And we're going to actually talk a little bit about that on Thursday when we talk about the countermeasures, because that's a proven countermeasure to have a plan. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on Thursday. All of these are due on June 13th. There's forms available. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So again, take your time. You've got about a month and a half to get those all in. Now, in terms of what are eligible projects, well, if there's from the hotspots, it's actually on the website for the Highway Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan. If it's a type of roadway that's listed specifically in the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan, which includes collectors and arterials in a lot of cases, or if you have a local road safety plan, those locations are eligible. But in addition, if you've got a proven countermeasure that's listed in the action plan or from the Federal Highway Administration, you can also apply for those. But remember, you're competing against people who have a plan, and if they're equal balance, the people with the plan are probably going to be a little bit higher up on the score. But there's a lot of money. So again, you might want to go ahead and put something in. Now, in terms of what proven countermeasures are there, there's the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan from the state. There's FHWA's proven countermeasures. And again, if you've got one in your local road safety plan, or as long as it's data-driven, your own local plan will work. Now, somebody in the Q&A put in, does an action plan through the SS4A planning grant count? Yes, that's actually the point. The SS4A planning grants are local road safety plans. And actually, I'll mention another grant that's coming out on that at the very end of our hour together. So the question is, which proven countermeasures should we choose from our bag of golden eggs that we've got? These are just plain eggs, but they're golden, right? Actually, I like the colors. So last time we talked about things such as markings and curb signs and lighting, keeping people in their lane. But now what I want to talk about are geometric issues. So we're going to talk today about roadway improvements, curves, friction, flattening slopes, fixed objects, widening clear zones. And then on Thursday, we'll talk about barriers and breakaway supports. And again, we'll go through a local road safety plan briefly, because again, we only have an hour together, and that can take quite a while to go through the details for that. Before you do anything, make sure you have good inventory. You really need to know what you've got. To me, this is one of the most important steps. You have to start by knowing what you've already got. And this drawing came from a class that we developed 18, 20 years ago, I think, Jim Markle, who's on our webinar today, uh, actually developed this as part of a class he developed that we've continued and maintained. And that class that's going out a couple more times this year started there. Again, start with a good foundation and keep working on it. Start with good inventory and develop a plan. So today we're talking pavement and geometric improvements. Now, what I'm going to do for each of the possible proven countermeasures is I'm going to talk about whether it is to keep the vehicle on the roadway, reduce the potential for the crash, or minimize severity as its primary focus. It will obviously have some overlap in a lot of cases. And then, is it a primary to reduce head-ons, rollover crashes, fixed object crashes? Is it really good at night? And then, is it more typically useful in curves or in the tangent sections? And maybe both. And it might be a primary improvement. It might be something that you might consider it if you're doing other work in the area. And we're going to start with roadway improvements at curves, which, hey, amazingly enough, are primary at curves, as you might guess. And they reduce the potential for all head-ons, rollovers, and fixed objects. They're not technically considered primary, but boy, they really make a big difference because we know that the number of crashes that occur in the curves are overrepresented when we start talking about local road safety plans and systemic safety. And why is this important? Well, again, we know that a lot of them occur when you're hitting fixed objects running off the roadway when you hit something like a tree or a shrub. About half of the fatal crashes occur when somebody runs off the road, and they're concentrated at our curves. So we really want to take care of these things. So in terms of roadway improvements, this is a proven countermeasure both in the state's highway safety improvement action plan, its roadway departure plans, and the Federal Highway Administration's proven countermeasures. So let's take an old picture, okay, and just think about what could you do to improve this? You know, you can all probably come up with some answers. You can see the curve signs facing the wrong way. You can see the lines are pretty faded. And if you look carefully, you can actually see that there's an edge drop off, which we know is a major safety issue. So there's lots of things we could do to improve this curve. And so if we improve the signage, we improve the delineation, we widen the inside of the curve out a little bit, boy, that can make a big difference. Make sure the signage does what it's supposed to do. And we talked about that last time. But, you know, just even adding some stripes can be really, really important. Those improved markings and signs together, we know reduce the number of crashes. But here's the key. Whatever you decide you want to do for an improvement, think about how you're going to maintain it after you install it. Okay? Once you put the markings down, you've committed to maintaining those. You need to budget for that. And so that's something that's part of the analysis. The grant may get you started, but can you maintain it? This needs to be part of your equation. So what I want to focus on is the curves, where we're going to repair the edge, we're going to repair drop-offs, we're going to widen the curves where we need to widen the curves. These are all things that are part of this concept of the proven countermeasures. And the widening of the curves occurs because people either cut the corner, we have all done that, and some vehicles just don't track in a nice smooth line. As you turn around the corner, they take more space. Now, this is actually in the standards, and we'll talk more about standards later today and actually throughout the rest of these webinars. But, you know, just think about it. If you've got a 20-foot wide roadway and really sharp corners, say 300 feet, and yes, there's actually more of those out there than you might think. If you've got a 300-foot radius, you actually need to widen the inside of that corner out to allow for the fact that vehicles don't track and people tend to cut the corner. It actually improves safety quite a bit. It's in the standards for a reason. Now, do you always get that? No, but it's something you might want to think about when you're looking at safety improvements at curves, okay? You want to make sure you've got good super elevation on your curves. That can be really a challenge when you've got a roadway with another roadway coming in, because we don't want that roadway to come in too high sometimes. So we tend to leave them relatively flat, but we know good elevation can improve that quite a bit and make sure the transitions are nice and smooth. Makes everything a little bit better. Okay? So let's just look at a couple of examples, and I'm going to ask you to think about what you would do. Okay? So think about what possible upgrades. I'm going to activate a poll, so you can go to the poll, and I'm going to go back to the picture so you can see it. What could you do to improve the safety of this particular corner? I've got 4 or 5 things I can think of that I would do. Let's see what you guys come up with. I'll give you about 20 seconds. Allows me to have a sip of my coffee too. Okay. So while you're doing that, I'm also going to activate my pen. Okay. Obviously, there's possibly some curve widening. This sign is not at the right location. It needs to be further back. There's some issues with this rail we'll be talking about on Thursday, but there's lots of things we can think about. And yeah, maybe some striping. So let's see what you came up with in the polls. Yeah. If you just start thinking about all the things you could do and somebody put reflectors on the rail, yeah, limit the brush, improve the sight distance, think about the super elevation. All these things are things you could possibly do here. Okay? So you're going to want to make an inventory of what possible improvements could be done. And somebody put in limit the speed. Well, remember, speed limits are controlled through the state for most county and town roads and village streets. Not village streets, sorry, county and town roads, unless you're a subdivision, a suburban town or a town over 50,000. So that could be a challenge, depending on the population of the town and whether it's a suburban town or not. But again, what can we do? Okay, so let's do another one. I'm going to purposely come in here and I'm going to clear the responses first. And I just cleared them. And now I'm going to go back to the picture and let's see what you come up with here. Again, give you about 20 seconds. There's 4 or 5 things here I can think of that I would probably think about doing. And we'll come back to these later on, even when we talk about some of the other proven countermeasures. There's a lot of overlap. Yeah, remove the dead trees that are especially in the outside of a quarter. We know that's a big issue. Somebody already put that in the Q&A. Okay, let's see what you came up with. Yeah, remove the trees, maybe widen the inside of the corner. Think about chevrons. Okay, think about your advisory signs. Maybe or maybe not having rail. We'll talk more about that on Thursday. And again, think about how that drives. Does it drive well? What's the super elevation? Does it have good transition? Okay. So a lot of improvements that could be made. So again, start developing an inventory as part of the development of a plan. Okay. And maybe those old guide rope hosts. Let's see, is my pen? Nope. I got to figure out. It used to be consistent and would let me have my pen every single time. But yeah, these old posts on the inside, those aren't delineators, those are fixed objects. So we want to remove those. Okay. Let's do one more and then we'll move on past here. And I'm going to clear this again. And I'll go back to the picture and let you come up with some possible upgrades here. By the way, just so you know, this is a low-speed roadway. Speed limit is actually only 30 miles an hour. Does that change your answer versus the last one, which was a high-speed roadway? Yeah, maybe some edge striping. Again, what traffic volume do you have? There are requirements for that we talked about last time, but also, are you committed to maintaining them? Maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not, especially in a low-speed roadway. Okay, let's see what y'all came up with. Yep, edge striping definitely came up, curve warning signs, improving the chevrons. Somebody noted those deflectors, those delineators, and we'll go back to the picture, should actually be white, okay? They should be white, not yellow. Technically, they're white on both sides, but I will tell you right now, as I've driven around the state, very rarely do I see white delineators on the outside, even though that is the standard in the MUTCD. But whatever you decide to do, think about the user, think about the driver. What can you do to help them going around the corner? Okay? So again, think about all of the things you can do to improve corners. It's really valuable to improve corners because most of our crashes occur there. And as you start developing your plans, you'll see that. That showed up in the Highway Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan as well. Okay. So again, you can start adding in some of these other proven countermeasures to your curves things. Somebody asked about the speed limit issue. In New York State, speed limits for town and county roads are controlled by the state through a process. You can go on our website and search for speed limits. It'll pop right up. Um, unless that town, it's the town, is over 50,000 people or is a suburban town by the Department of State. Okay. Now, our next proven countermeasure is one that is relatively short in terms of the number of slides I'm going to talk about, but can actually have a pretty big impact, and that's reducing the potential for a crash, especially on curves, by widening your shoulders out, giving people a little bit more space before they go off into the grass or they go off on the edge. They have a little more control on our shoulders than they do on just plain earth, okay, especially towards the end of winter or if the ground is soft in the spring. Now, in terms of how much improvement there is, one of the things you may want to look at while you're developing your grant is something called the Crash Modification Factor Clearinghouse, or CMF Clearinghouse. And this all comes from a book called the Highway Safety Manual. These are referenced in the handout. And the idea is you can actually calculate the reduction of crashes by using this chart. Okay? So just to illustrate this, we're going to do an example together, and then I'm going to have you do one. So going from a 2-foot shoulder to a 4-foot shoulder on a roadway with 2,000 vehicles. So if it's 2,000 vehicles, and let me change colors because I want to do a color we're not using already. Let me see. Let's see. Will the orange show up? Let's see if the orange shows up. Yeah, the orange isn't too bad. So we have 2,000 vehicles. So it's this line right here. Okay, so what you do is you take the ratio of the existing width. Okay, so in this case, you take the ratio of the 2-foot line, which is here, okay, and the ratio of the 4-foot line, which is here, okay. And so in this case, you take the 4-foot and put it on top of your calculation, and you take the one you're going to after, okay, excuse me, before on the bottom, so the before goes on the bottom, okay. So you take the ratio of that, and you get 0.89, or frankly 90%. Okay, so about a 10% reduction in the number of crashes. And this is for a local road with a moderate width. Okay, so let you do an example. Okay, now I'm going to go from a 0 to a 6-foot shoulder and throw it in the Q&A. Somebody want to be brave and throw it in the Q&A, how much improvement we're going to get. Okay, looking at the chart, what kind of crash modification factor are we going to get? Should this reduction be applied to a specific crash type? That's actually one of the things you got to look at when you're reading these factors in the Crash Modification Factor Clearinghouse, or CMF Clearinghouse, because the reality is they are focused on different types of crashes: fatal crashes, serious crashes, all crashes. And we'll actually give you some other examples of this. And the other thing, as I mentioned last time, make sure when you look at it, you either read the report or you go through and you look for the ones with a large number of stars. There's 4 and 5 stars available. Make sure you choose one that's got lots of stars. Okay? So again, the challenge here is trying to make sure you get the right choices here. Okay? So let's go through this together here. We'll do one more. Okay? So again, we have 0-foot and we have 6-foot. And again, I kept it at 2,000. So we're at this line right here. So the 0-foot and the 6-foot lines are the yellow and the green, or yellow and, yeah, I guess that's green. Yellow and green. And we're going to take the ratio, okay? So afterwards, it's going to be 1. And before, it's 1.5. Okay? So that's 0.67, or 6666666, or about a 2/3 of the crashes are reduced, or about a 33% reduction in the number of crashes. So the CMF would be 0.67. You might hear something called a crash reduction factor, which is just 1 minus that, and that would be 0.33 or 33% reduction in the number of crashes. And for this particular one, it's for all crashes, just so you know. But again, yes, you'd definitely want to look at that. If you're thinking about doing any modification, go check the CMF clearinghouse, see if it's available. It may not be in every case, but we know roadway shoulders really make a big difference. And my advice is do what you can with what you've got where you are. And we'll talk more about that issue here in just a couple of minutes. But let's talk about something that's it's part of the pavement, it's part of the geometric thing, and I will tell you right now, we actually are not in bad shape in New York State. We're actually in very good shape. And the idea is friction. If we improve the friction or keep the friction up to a certain level, we keep that vehicle in its lane, we keep them in their road, we don't have as much of a problem, and it's good for all roads. Straightaways, curves, tangents, intersections, it may not be a primary because we do have a very good program for friction here in New York State, but it is something you may want to think about. Now, you get a road surface that looks like this, that's hard to fix. I will tell you right now, even what I'm going to talk about here that's a proven countermeasure is not always going to work here because if there's a lot of excess asphalt left over from your emulsion work or your cold mix, or even in hot mix sometimes this will even happen if you got water pushing up from underneath. That's a bleeding roadway on a hot day like we might get later today before the rains come. That can be very difficult to fix. You almost have to mill that out to get it back. But slippery pavement can be very, very dangerous, okay? So bleeding is a challenge for all of us. We certainly don't want roads that look like this, but we know it's a proven countermeasure to give good skid resistance. Um, we'll see if this video shows today. I'm going to be brave. You know, and hey, by the way, there's a tree there. That's a curve problem. It's a clear zone problem. It's a bad day for that driver. Okay. And again, you want to make sure you keep the friction up. Now, there's debates about what caused this particular fatal truck rollover, but again, friction might have helped, it might not have. He overtipped. He got a little bit going a little bit too fast, and there's an argument about whether or not the problem was friction or he's just going too fast. The key, though, is you can only do what you can do with what you've got. He tried to overcorrect. Did the tire slip before he flipped over? We don't know completely. There's some evidence of a little bit of a skid there afterwards, so it looks like there was some slippage. Some of it might have just been going too fast. We're trying to balance everything with everything else, okay? So again, he's laying skid marks, but at this point, he's already started the tip. It's the skid mark that's behind us that's maybe the more critical one. But the key is we want to improve the friction. If you can double the skid resistance, you can cut the number of crashes or accidents in half, okay? Now, what are the factors that we have to look at? Well, obviously tire issues, these are vehicle issues, the weather can make a huge difference. We can only do so much here, okay? But we can do good snow and ice control. We can worry about bleeding roadways. Just remember the friction demand, which is partly a geometry issue. Radius, things like that, partly a speed issue. And of course, the driver's actions are part of the equation. And so are the vehicle characteristics. So how do we improve this? Well, you could put down a new chip seal. Okay, you could micro mill off a bleeding surface or even shot blast it, some agencies have done when they've got polished aggregates. But generally, if you've got a bleeding or polishing roadway, you probably have to think about putting a new surface down, which is why chip seal is really popular because of the fact that you're putting down a new aggregate. And if you get high friction aggregates, and we do have a good program here in New York, for the most part, you can do a pretty good job of improving the friction. For Portland cement concrete, you might do some grooving, but the key is you might have to put down a friction course, whether that's a Nova chip, and there's something called HFST or high friction surface treatments. And this is used in critical locations where you know there's a problem. So if you've got a skid problem, if you look at the accident data or the crash data, you start seeing that, you might want to go look at it. Now, in terms of skid resistant surfaces, New York State actually did this on some bridge overpasses down in Long Island at 36 sites, and they reduced the number of annual wet road crashes They used to be 800, and now they cut them in half on the wet road. And 20% of all crashes were reduced by just improving the surface by putting in a high friction surface treatment. So it can be very, very effective. Now, what is a high friction surface treatment? It's a different kind of aggregate. It's not an emulsion-based product. It's a polymer-based kind of thing product that goes down. Um, Most of the time, you're using some kind of special rock that's brought in that's really, really high friction, much higher than what we normally use. Bauxite, certain granites can be good, some cannot, so be very careful. And they're very small, so it's almost like a large sand seal when you're putting it down. And if we look at this particular video, you can see how much quicker the vehicle stops on the red with the high friction. A tremendous difference in the amount of time it takes, this reduction in time it takes to stop. Okay. So high friction surface treatments can be used. And here's the cool thing. High friction surface treatments are safety treatment. Yes, they're primarily to be a safety treatment. But guess what? If you do them right at the right time, they're also a pavement preservation technique. They're both. They're like the old Saturday Night Live fake ad about it's a floor wax and a dessert topping. It's a safety treatment and a pavement preservation technique and has similar lifespans to other chip seals and microsurfacing and things like that. In Pennsylvania, they did this at some intersections where they had safety problems, and they cut the number of crashes from 26 to 1. Okay? That's pretty good. They improved the skid numbers up from 22 to 75. In other words, they went from pretty dangerous to pretty safe. Okay? Nothing's perfectly safe, but they can make a huge difference. So again, if you've got slippery roads, there's techniques out there to look at that. Now, there's the safety edge or shoulder edge wedge. There's different names. Some people use the shoulder edge wedge because safety edge does have a trademark on it. Um, it's primarily for tangents, but it actually can be very useful inside of a corner because of the fact that you are not only doing an improvement for safety, but you're stabilizing the edge of the pavement as well. Okay? And so normally we just pave it, we get this rough edge, okay, that if a vehicle goes off, it can be very dangerous. So here's some testing that was done out at the Texas Transportation Institute. This is from the 80s, so it's an older vehicle. And you can see what happens when somebody goes off the pavement. They try to turn their wheel to get back up. But that can be very, very dangerous because now they put a lot of pressure. And when they do finally get back onto the roadway, watch what happens. This was a professional driver. They would clearly be in the other lane. In fact, on a two-lane road, they would have been off on the other side. In fact, you probably have heard or have seen of situations where somebody went off the one side of the roadway, and as they were trying to come back up, they swung all the way across over to the other side. And that's actually the better problem because it could have been a head-on, which are some of the most dangerous crashes that we've got. So how do we improve this? Well, the safety edge or shoulder wedge, the idea is you come in with a pretty flat angle. Normally you're at the 70, 80 degree angle. Now we're talking 30 to 35 degree angle, very, very flat. And so you can improve the safety. Now, this is a chart that was put out from the Texas Transportation Institute, and I'm going to modify it because I don't like what they put on here. Let me change one thing. I'm going to put safer, reasonably safer, marginally safer, because you can't make things completely safe, okay? But the idea is for a standard type of overlay, it's a pretty flat shape, or even if you pave it, it's still pretty dangerous very, very quick, even just a few inches. And it goes from being relatively safer to much less safe pretty quick. Okay, if you get a few inches of asphalt there, it can be extremely dangerous. If you put in a little flatter, like a 45-degree angle, you get better. But if you can get that angle down to 30, 35 degrees, you're really staying in a zone where people can pull off and right back up without having to apply a lot of extra pressure. It's a lot safer. And oh, by the way, it improves the pavement uh, lifespan because it actually helps with compaction and keeps that edge in good shape. It increases the edge compaction. So here's an example. Two roadways, one lane was paved with a safety edge, one was paved without. They left the shoulders off of it. As you can see, it's about 6 inches of pavement, and they left it. And you can see the one side's holding up fine, the other side, not so much. And we've all seen that, edge cracking. because we didn't get edge compaction. You're putting a device inside the paver to improve the durability. Now, this is a roadway. Obviously, there's a lot of trucks driving on some brand new pavement with a safety edge. It'd been paved the day before as part of the project. And you can see just that safety edge, almost no damage whatsoever. Heck, you can't even see the marks on the pavement from the vehicles coming up and down. So really improves the durability, allows you to actually just go down the roadway and pave and then come back and put your shoulders in. And yes, you still want to go back and put those shoulders in. Absolutely want to do that. You don't want to just leave them blank, but it can be a very good way to improve the safety edge. So let me ask you to pick two benefits for improving a safety edge or a safety wedge, depending on how you like to describe it. I let you pick two of them. Yeah. We still need to back up their shoulders. Good job. Yeah. And it's actually, in terms of how much more asphalt, surprisingly little. Okay. There's, this huge amount of extra asphalt. Not really. It's just a little bit of a wedge area out there. So it doesn't really add that much. And if you've done a good job with grading, you actually don't add much at all in terms of extra asphalt. So A and C is the right answers. So let me just ask you, raise your hand. So I let you raise your hand if your agency is using the safety edge or the shoulder wedge. Raise your hand if your agency is. I know of two counties that have actually put it into their standard, and it's actually in the state standard for certain operations. So about 10% of you so far. This is probably something we should think about doing system-wide. But here's a great chance to try it out as a pilot or to do it on a few specific locations, see the benefits, and decide if this is something you want to add to your standard operating procedures. Okay? Now, another proven countermeasure is to flatten the slopes. The flattening the slopes means you're going to get rid of your rollover crashes or reduce them. You're going to reduce the chances of hitting fixed objects. You're going to make sure you get a wide clear zone, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's good for curves, good for tangents. Really good, right? So great. But you can get some pretty steep slopes out there. And we know that. And so you may not be able to afford or be able to put in a flattened slope. We know it doesn't work everywhere. There's other things you're going to think about. We'll talk about some of those on Thursday. Okay? But look at this. That slope looks nice, but boy, would you want to go off on that? That's about a 1-on-2 slope. Okay, I know the picture almost looks like a 45-degree angle, but it's actually about a 1-on-2 slope. To make that better, you'd really want to come in here and flatten that out. And how much you flatten that out? Well, that depends, of course, on both how much money you've got and your right-of-way, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But think about this. This is a 2-lane road, all crashes from the crash modification factor from the CMF clearinghouse. And you can see if I went from a 1-on-2 to a 1-on-4, I'm reducing about 6% of all crashes on that segment. And not all crashes are going to occur just because he went off the shoulder. And by the time I get up to a 1-on-5, I'm really doing some really good work. Okay, so we know flattening slopes makes a big difference. This is for all crashes. If you look at fatal crashes, it actually goes even better. Reduces fatals and seriouses by quite a bit, though I will admit the studies that have been done have a pretty big error in them. But we know it's a proven countermeasure. It's something you might want to think about. But we know there's an issue. So tell me, if this is a road by use, or a street by prescription in a village, mark the edge of the right-of-way. Click on the little picture for me and tell me where the edge of the right-of-way is. Let's see what y'all think. Yeah, there's the problem. Roads by use, it's hard to define. Okay, we don't have a deed. And that road by use, if you've maintained that pavement and that's it, might actually be the edge of the pavement. If you've maintained and kept clear anything in front of the fence, it might be the fence. But oh, by the way, you've let that tree grow up, you've probably lost that right of way. It's now the front of that tree. That can be a challenge, okay? It's actually can be a big challenge, by the way, later on if you're trying to do work using these funds. And we'll talk about that. But roads by use essentially comes about that if the road has been used by the public for 10 or more years, okay, and there's no deed, the deed might read to the center line, then it's going to be a road by use. But it has to have some public work done on it. In other words, the government has done some maintenance. They've plowed it. They've done more than plowing. they paved it, they put up rail, they put up a bridge. That becomes a public road, but the right-of-way width is driven by what they've maintained. And if they haven't maintained it, it's not the right-of-way. So either there's a deed or the right-of-way is what's been maintained. And we don't want to wind up with something like our friend, the Hess Triangle down in New York City, that was never actually taken over properly. So anytime you're doing work with federal funds, you have to have the deed or a piece of paper that defines the right-of-way. That's part of the project. So if you're thinking about flattening the slopes or widening the clear zones, which we're going to talk about next, make sure you've done a good job of getting your right-of-way. It has to be in writing, okay? Now, our last major improvement is to remove the fixed objects, widen out your clear zone, okay? That's actually pretty important. Now, again, is it a primary? That depends. In the state's plan, it's just considered something you might consider, but on the local system, it could be really, really critical to have a good clear zone. And a good, consistent clear zone or removing fixed objects is a proven countermeasure. They go by different terms, so just be aware of the fact that improving the clear zone and removing fixed objects are similar, though really the idea is make the clear zone traversable and you make everybody happier. So I've gone driving down the road, my tire blows out. I can go left or right. I have enough control to do that. Raise your hand if you go off to the right. Raise your hand if you can go off into the grass to the right. Oh, you're going to have a bad day if you did that. If you roll off to the right on this particular stretch of highway, there's some stumps out there. Do me a favor. When you look at your clear zone, remember a tree, anything above about 4 inches, is a fixed object. Heck, even smaller can cause serious damage. If you decide to take the tree down, go flush. Anything above 4 inches can snag a vehicle, and truth be told, anything above even just a few inches can cause some serious issues with the vehicle control. So cut it flush, get it flat. Do you need to remove the stump? That depends on the site and situation, but get it flat, okay? Clear zone consistency is probably one of the most critical things we can do. This is a pretty good clear zone. I actually think this is fine, other than this culvert where it's narrowed up a little bit. So again, you might think about improving that, making that a little bit wider and improving the safety and getting rid of the rail completely, which we'll talk about on Thursday. Okay. Now, you may have heard, in fact, actually, I'm going to lower everybody's hands. Okay, let me lower your hands. How many of you have heard of the concept of a 30-foot clear zone being what we need to have? How many of you have ever heard that? Yeah, a lot of you have heard that. Now, how many of you would like to live on roads that every single road had a 30-foot clear zone? No trees, nothing that's not breakaway. I'm not sure we want to have that. The 30-foot clear zone comes from the General Motors proving grounds, where they would drive off the road and they started plotting of the 211 vehicles that ran off the road while they were testing cars out over a 10-year period. About 80% of the test drivers stopped within 30 feet. But remember, there was nothing to hit. It was really flat slopes. We're talking 1 on 6, 1 on 7 kind of slopes, completely controllable. They decided to have a 100-foot clear zone even as they expanded their track. But they didn't have to worry about hitting anything. So if you don't have to worry about anything, well then, guess what? 30 feet is great. And yeah, what would that do to additional speeds? There's some questions about that. And remember, a 30-foot clear zone in of itself may not be enough. Here's a picture from an interstate that was sent by a colleague from Federal Highway Administration. Those piers are way more than 30 feet from the edge line because the shoulders are, about 10 feet, and then you've got the grass. But you can see, if we look from the other side, that it's clearly been hit because it's on a curve. So in of itself, a 30-foot clear zone may not be enough, okay? You really want to think about having consistent, good clear zones. And this comes where we have geometric standards. So again, I'm going to lower your hands one more time. I'm going to ask all of you, how many of you have a set of standards that you use for the geometry on your roadways? How many of you actually have a set of standards? Every public agency should have a set of standards. If you do not, you will be, if there's a crash, you may be held in court to somebody else's standards. And that's something that might get you into trouble. So you need to have a set of standards and a set of standards that you can feel comfortable and follow. There's the AASHTO Green Book. There's the New York State Highway Design Manual, which essentially follows the Green Book with some modifications dealing with the fact that we do have snow and ice here in New York State. There is a set of standards from AASHTO called the AASHTO Low Volume Road Standards. It was last updated in 2019. The cool thing about this particular standard, it goes up to about 2,000 vehicles a day, and a lot of local roads are under 2,000 vehicles a day. You still need to know about the Green Book and the Highway Design Manual because it's a thin book. It doesn't cover every single geometric application, but it can really help you. You can develop your own, but remember, uh, you don't want to get in a situation where you're having to defend that in court. You want one that you can deal with. Okay, so you could develop your own. But again, what's the standard? What are you going back to if something ever did happen? Now, within the Geometric Design Guide for Low Volume Roads from AASHTO, what essentially it says is for new streets, urban low-speed streets, um, you need to have about 18 inches from the curb face, and more is better, of course. That's actually how they define it. 18 inches from the curb face, more is better. And you think about most places where there is curb, 18 inches will work. Now, when you don't have curb, you need a little bit more in urban areas, but it's something to think about. What is the actual minimum width you want for the clear zone? Now, in terms of clear zones for new roads in rural areas, for low volume, really low volume, we're talking under 400 vehicles per day, 6 feet is consistent. 6 feet is probably fine. For most local roads, 7 to 10 feet, arterials and collectors, that's where we start getting the 10 to 30 feet. We start looking at the higher level standards, the Green Book, the Highway Design Manual, and it's all dependent upon speed and volume. And so you may want to think about developing a clear zone policy for your agency. Make that part of your plan, and if you can tie it back to a reasonable standard, you actually reduce your liability as well. Now, here's the cool thing about the AASHTO little uh, Green Book, as it's sometimes called. They actually borrowed from a book developed here in New York State. We actually have a copy of it up on our website from the local rural class Rural Road Classification Task Force. I think I got that right, but I should have written it in my notes. I see the copy of it over there, but I'm not going to go grab it. But what they found was that most roads, they were doing the job. So for an existing road, if you do a risk-based approach, just maintain the existing width. If you don't have evidence of crashes before, you're going to be okay. But look for those crash locations, look for inconsistencies in the clear zone, and improve those locations, and just do it as part of your overall construction or rehabilitation plan. Okay? You're doing this for liability, but you're also doing it for improvement to the public. We don't want to get rid of every tree. But if you've got evidence the tree has been hit, I think it's a good time to start thinking about, well, maybe that tree needs to find something else to protect it than some barrels. But people love their trees, so I understand the challenge involved. Maybe replace it with a different tree. But boy, the liability is high. Let's do another one. Do you see an issue here? Does that tree look okay? It's just off the road. Right? One tree doesn't look too bad. It's actually a cluster, I think, of a couple of trees. Can't be quite sure, but look at it from the other side. You can see the slope isn't too bad, but boy, that one tree has evidence it's been hit. It's just on the right place in the outside of a corner. So think about that. Look at trying to be consistent in your clear zone. And while we talked about trees, make sure anything that is inside that clear zone is breakaway or traversable. So in the case, like for instance, mailboxes, okay? Um, you know, gang mailboxes are great, but there's better mailboxes out there. This is one that didn't work at all. It would be a really bad day, okay? And, make sure people don't put in these fancy mailboxes that look great on paper, but boy, they don't look great when you hit them with a car. That's a fixed object. That's not only a liability, but it's a safety issue as well. And of course, if you do have cross culverts or driveway pipes that are more than 36 inches, you're going to want to think about putting some kind of protection over the end of them. Okay, this is one over a driveway. And again, if a vehicle gets into that ditch, it's going to roll up onto that grate, which is actually number 8 rebar in a 1-foot grid. It actually works pretty well, but make sure you can get in there in a storm event. So there's all kinds of things you can do. Now, before I do a couple of quick questions about this, somebody asked the question, how does improved clear zones impact speeding issues? Everybody thinks, oh, you improve the clear zone, people will go faster. Surprisingly, not as much as you might think. But if you make it too wide, yeah, people will feel like things are going too fast. So it's why we have standards, and we don't try to make a local road 12-foot lanes with a 7-foot shoulder. We make them 10 or 11-foot lanes with a 4-foot shoulder. It's that balancing act between how much we can afford, the liability and the risk, but the consistency more than anything else. I've got examples, and there is some studies out there that says it does increase speed a little bit. We're talking 5, 10 miles an hour. Not the kind of thing that's going to make much of a difference as you might think. People drive how they feel comfortable, yes, but they also don't necessarily notice the things that are outside the traveled way as much as you'd like them to see, because they're looking at the traveled way. So let me ask you a couple of quick things. First off, what would you do here? In this case, I'm trying something. I'm going to put the question up on the screen and the picture in the bottom right. I'll go back and look at the picture real big. You can see the picture here. And then I'll go back and pull it up. It's on the bottom right. We'll see if this works. And I'll give you about 20, 30 seconds to put in what you think you might do here. Okay, let's go see what you came up with for answers. Okay. So you drop that lid even with the pavement? Yeah. Maybe add a side pipe in. You certainly want to remove those posts. There should be breakaway posts. Yeah. Make the top of the catch basin flush with the grade. There's a culvert that goes underneath there, by the way. Yep. Lower the basin top. Yep. Again, there's a cross culvert, but that doesn't mean you couldn't put approach culverts into it that are safer, that somebody wouldn't hit them. Okay. You might want to put a little bit better drainage structure up. Do you need rail? Hey, we're going to talk about that on Thursday, whether you should have rail or not. Okay. You could widen that pavement. It might be a little bit narrow. Again, that depends on the traffic volume. Okay. And whether you put up guide rail or guardrail or rail of any type, we'll talk about on Thursday, and lower the top. Yeah. You know the kinds of things to look for. So again, think about that. The key is try to make that clear zone as consistent and as wide as you can within the economics that we all have to deal with. And these are going to all be proven countermeasures. Now, again, if we had 2 hours, we could spend even more time on all of this, but I want you to realize there's a lot of things we can do in the geometry. And I really say focusing on the curves and focusing on your clear zones is one of the best bang for the bucks that we can have. But I would also think about adding the shoulder edge wedge. Flattening slopes where you can within the limitations of the right-of-way, improving your friction, putting in a consistent shoulder, and maybe widening it out when you get to a curve. On Thursday, we will talk about breakaway supports, barriers, even median barriers a little bit, and then finish up with local road safety plans. But again, let me just ask, of today's countermeasures, which ones are you going to try? You have to click on all of them if you want. So which ones are you going to try? Let's see how many people we get here. Good to see. Good to see. Okay. Again, when you're doing the one thing about a grant like this, grant process, is it's really valuable to try something out. Okay. This is the chance to try it as part of either a pilot project or part of an overall plan. Try it with some other municipalities, things like that. And it's almost a no-lose scenario. Now, let's see here. I'm going to clear out the questions that we've got. And then I'm going to ask you if you have any additional questions. Any additional questions? If not, I got a couple of more points to make before we let you go. Hopefully, we'll see some of you on Thursday, finishing up our discussion on proven countermeasures, improving the chances of a safe recovery. Next week, we'll be talking about the use of the ball bank to determine the proper advisory speed for curves. We're going to walk through that process really slowly. Um, so spend an hour together talking about how to use the ball bank and some of the pitfalls that people have when they use it. And then I just want to remind you that there's the local roads uh, available call for funds through the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan, $90 million. $10 million has been set aside for a local road safety plan. If you don't have a local road safety plan, you absolutely should think about getting one, and those are due on June 13th. And just as a reminder, you can contact Andrew Sattinger with the state or go to the website to download all that information. So I asked this last week. I'm going to ask it again this week. Are you planning to put in for a grant for local roads HSIP? That's what the official program is. Are you going to be putting it in? Let's see how we did from last week. Yeah, we're doing a little better than last time. Still got a lot of not sures out there. Okay, again, you can do a small project. You can develop a local road safety plan. It's relatively easy to do. I've read through all of the materials. The biggest challenge is you do want to get some good cost information. And yes, if you're wondering, you can use these funds to buy some right-of-way in some limited situations because you will need to document the right-of-way, but it has to be part of the overall safety improvement. So you can't use the money to pave a roadway, but you could use the money to improve the inside of a corner. So the safety improvement portion of the work. Okay, if that helps you out at all. Now, if you're not interested or you just don't feel like the state project is good for you, and yes, there's still federal dollars, you also might want to look at the US DOT has a direct call to local agencies through their Safe Streets for All grant program. Someone had mentioned that earlier. They developed the local road safety plan for that. They have specific grants for planning grants to develop the local road safety plans or demo grants to try something out, or an implementation grant from a local road safety plan. So there's plenty of choices out there that are available. That one's due a couple of weeks after the state's call. Um, all of them are federal dollars. So if you're going to be doing a grant, you might want to come join us on the 22nd of May, where we're going to walk through the local federal aid process. Because if you haven't done a project in a while, or if you've never done many projects, this is something that could be fairly useful to you. So one last question for you. Raise your hand if you've done a federal aid project, which both this call from the state and that USDOT direct call would be considered federal dollars. So raise your hand. So if you don't raise your hand, we hope to see you on the 22nd because we really want you to get through the process. We want you to succeed. Okay. And that's going to be a little bit longer. That's not really a webinar. It's more of a workshop. It'll take us the course of most of the day. Okay. With that, remember the PDH certificates. Don't look for them this week. They'll be going out next week. And do you have any other questions that you've got for me? You can throw them in the Q&A. We got a couple of minutes. We'll still get you out of here right on time. No questions? Give you 30 more seconds. Is there a minimum dollar amount to ask for on the roadway departure grant? There is off the top of my head. I don't remember what it is. It's in the call. The national one has a minimum project size is like $500,000. But I don't remember exactly what that is. And then somebody says, can we review the slope fattening one real quick? Let me go back and show that slide to you. We got a minute or two. Now, this is for all crashes, not specifically for the fatals and stuff. But if you look at it, the idea is you take it's just a chart showing you the slide slope before and the side slope after, and you just find where those intersect. So if you had a roadway with a 1-on-2 slope and you flattened it out to a 1-on-5 slope, and by the way, if you did a 1-on-5 slope, you wouldn't need to have any rail. You just come where these two intersect each other. I do need to pick a color you can see. And they'd intersect each other at 0.91, so you'd be reducing about 10% of all crashes. And as I said, it actually does a better improvement than that when you're dealing with fatal and serious crashes. Okay. Ah, thank you. Somebody did put it in there. I knew that there was a number. I just couldn't remember off the top of my head. It's $250,000. Now, some of you are probably going, how can I spend $250,000 on projects? Remember, you don't have to do this alone. You could bundle. A series of towns could bundle all their curve signs. The county and towns together could do all of their roadway improvements on corners. You can bundle these projects together. In fact, that's actually not only a good idea, it's actually recommended in a lot of cases. And when we talk about federal aid, we'll talk about bundling. So with that, um, we're right at the top of the hour. If you have any more questions, please email us or go on our website, look for lots of information there, and we hope to see a lot of you on Thursday. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.